to welcome you all to the final event of Bridge to Pond between North Carolina in the USA and Sweden.
Hello from Waynesville, North Carolina. My name is Trung Nguyen Nguyen, and I also want to welcome you here today. We are very excited to share with you our own experience of transatlantic dialogue. Over the last few weeks, we have been engaging with our peers across the Atlantic to discuss and find compromises to topics and issues we find important.
In our transatlantic committees, we talked about equality and the right not to be discriminated in matters of gender, age, origin, every person's right to make their voice heard, and the right to equal education. We are happy to share with you the results of our collaboration today and contribute positive solutions to issues our generation is facing.
We are also happy to share with you this experience of dialogue and building friendships across a 4,300-mile distance. COVID-19 has kept us physically away from our school, classes, and other things we love doing. Bridge the Pond was a very welcome virtual school trip for 2021.
Firstly, we would like to welcome some important guests and supporters who we are honored to have with us here today. Before moving to our committees presentations, we would like to give them the opportunity to say a few words.
Some housekeeping instructions. Don't forget to switch on your microphones and to switch them off when you're done. And you can limit your interventions to less than 2 minutes. It would be great. Please welcome Joe Doon, Director at the European Parliament Office in the United States.
Thank you, Trung. Thank you, Robin. Yes, it's a great privilege for me as head of the European Parliament Office in Washington, DC, to help inaugurate the latest bridge across the pond and the latest strand of transatlantic dialogue. As the moderators were just saying, these are challenging times, and it's important for us to stand together and to connect at multiple levels. Our job in the European Parliament Liaison Office is to connect the members of Parliament. But of course, it's very important to connect the members and the legislators, but it's important to connect at other levels too. And I think this exercise that you're doing today, for which I wish you great success, I think is really important. You're the future after all. So we're trying to deal with the present so you can prepare the world for the future and prepare the connections that are so across the Atlantic that are so important. So I'll just say thank you especially to Ryan, whose personal commitment and involvement has made all of this project possible. We're extremely grateful and very happy that the MEP for Gothenburg, Evin Incir, is with us today. This is a wonderful, I was going to say crowning achievement, but of course the event hasn't happened yet, but I think it's absolutely vital to reflect basically the different levels of connection. And it's great that the embassies, that the representation at the national level is also represented. And we're grateful to EPLO Stockholm for working with us at the other end of the bridge. And of course, without Magnus, Erika, and Suzanne, without the teachers, nothing would have happened. But it's all about the students. So I'll hand back to you. I'm very privileged to be here and to say the first inaugural word. Thank you very much. Back to you.
Thanks for that. Let's also welcome Anna Kristersson Roth from the European Parliament Office to Sweden.
Thank you, Trung. Thank you very much. Dear all, my name is Anna Kristersson Roth, and I would like to, on behalf of the European Parliament Office here in Stockholm, also welcome all our distinguished guests here today. Students, thank you very much for your hard work during the last 3 weeks. I think we're all very much looking forward to hearing your conclusions on the important topic today, equality in different stands in society. I also hope that Bridge the Pond have helped you to gain some insight and experience in exactly that, creating dialogue, listen to different perspectives, finding solutions and compromises. something I think we experience in everyday life and definitely in the political circle that I and Ryan and my colleagues work in. Finally, I would just like also to express my gratitude to our teachers. Without Erica and Suzanne and Magnus, with their diligence and enthusiasm and problem solving as well, from technical issues to other issues, we would have not been able to launch this project. And of course, also a special thank you, if I may, to my colleagues in EPLO Washington who carries this on. And we're very privileged to be the third member country here on this side of the bridge, the pond, who takes this experience. And of course, we're delighted to welcome our MEP, Ms. Evin from Gothenburg. Thank you.
Thank you. And next, we'd like to welcome Mr. Peter Kvist from the Embassy of Sweden in Washington, DC, and Mr. Joseph Lin from the United States Embassy in Stockholm. Mr. Kvist, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. I seem to be having a little bit of video problems, but perhaps they're solved now. Hello from Washington. It's great to be here as part of the Bridge the Pond initiative. Perhaps just a few words. I'm a diplomat, as you say, at the Swedish Embassy in Washington, DC, where I focus on human rights, democracy, development, and gender equality. So, you know, with that portfolio, I find it so exciting to be here today and take part of these discussions. And perhaps, you know, with this initiative and these discussions, you might have an interest in joining the diplomatic corps at some point, and I can just recommend you that it's the best occupation in the world. And I think you've taken a great first step by engaging in this initiative. And, you know, from my perspective, in today's digitalized and globalized world, all our major challenges requires this type of cross-border dialogue. We're looking at everything from conflict to climate change to migration or the pandemic, global health, as we're experiencing today. There's just nothing that we can do by ourselves, no matter how big or small we are. We need to work together. So that's why I think this type of initiative is really fantastic, and I look forward to today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kvist. Mr. Lin, you have the floor.
Yeah. Good afternoon and good morning to all of you. My name is Joe Lin. I am the Economic Unit Chief here in Stockholm, Sweden. I represent the US on a variety of fronts, but mostly on economic issues. It's really a pleasure to be here with the students. I'm really glad to see Ryan again, and also Joe and Anna and Robin and Sovik. Thank you for moderating, and MEP Incir. And glad to have you here. This is really my favorite part of my job, and that is speaking to students and sharing a little bit about what we do at the embassy and what the US government is doing overseas. Pretty much, you can imagine, I'm pretty much doing what you're doing now, just probably more in a suit and tie. We are deepening relations with Sweden and with our bilateral partners. It's actually quite busy here. No one would really think so. It's in Stockholm, but it's really busy, and that's for good reasons. It's because Sweden and the United States get along on a lot of things. So since we agree on so many things, we work together in so many areas. Some of the areas that I cover are climate change. I'll also do economic relations, deal with also our relations with China and technological issues. So just a tiny bit of what we do. So I'm really looking forward to the conversation with the students. I wanted to echo Peter that, you know, it's a great career. If you're interested, you'd like to travel, have the government pay for you, it's not a bad deal. And wanted just to say that I really appreciate being here and looking forward to our discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lin. We are very honored to have an elected representative joining the first part of our discussion today, the Honorable Member of European Parliament, Evin Incir. Honorable Evin Incir, we are looking forward to sharing our work with you and to hear your views. We give you the full floor for a brief introduction.
First of all, thank you very much also from my side for having me in this discussion. I'm very much looking forward to the dialogue that we will be having. Very short about me. I'm actually doing my second year, or I'm doing my third year now. 2 years has already passed since the last elections that took place 2019. And the issue that I'm working with is connected to the issues that you already raised and that you have been working on: human rights, democracy, and among that, gender equality. I myself actually right now working on trying to make the EU Commission to put forward a legislation on gender-based violence. But I think we will have be able to discuss it more thoroughly in a couple of minutes. But I also want to very much salute the work that you are doing and the importance of this kind of transatlantic cooperations, but also international and global cooperations in general, especially in a time that we are being faced with more and more global challenges. And I also want to very clearly add that most of the times it is the young people and the youth who are paving the way for solving issues that we are globally or commonly faced with. So thank you very much for this work that you are doing and for hosting these discussions. And I'm very much looking forward to hear more about your work.
Thank you, Ms. Incir. We'd now like to pass the floor to our amazing teachers who have guided us in our transatlantic endeavor. Erica Smiley from North Carolina, Magnus Myssling and Suzanne Fogstrom from Sweden. They will each briefly introduce themselves as they introduce the committees.
So, dear all, I think you can hear me. My name is Magnus Myssling, and I'm one of the 3 teachers from Gothenburg, Sweden, and Erica Smiley from the States. So, I would just like to introduce Committee A, the Committee for Gender Equality. Please start.
Savannah, you're up.
Yes. Yes. Is the presentation ready for them to see? Yes. It's not working. So, gender equality is something that most would agree is worth fighting for. But what is gender equality? In numerous sources like the UN Charter or the European Convention on Human Rights, this would be defined as everyone having the same rights and freedoms, independent of their gender or sex. Yet gender inequality remains a problem across the globe, both in obvious ways as well as in subtle ways. In the shape of a so-called glass roof, we have chosen to look into 2 of the areas in which women still lag behind men despite of a lack of legal barriers: economics, specifically salaries, and political empowerment, measured by the ratio of women to men in their upper levels of government. These are issues that affect all women.
According to payscale.com, women earn about 82 cents for every dollar a man makes. For men and women who work at the same job with equal qualifications, women earn 98 cents for every dollar a man makes. In the EU, it varies a lot, but generally, women earn about 14.1% less than men. There are four major causes for the gender pay gap. The first is gender-dominated industries. Female-dominated jobs and industries, such as home health aides and childcare workers, have an overall lower income and fewer benefits than male-dominated jobs, such as building and construction. 2. Differences in years of experience. Women are disproportionately driven out of the workforce to accommodate caregiving and other unpaid obligations, and therefore tend to have less work experience than men. 3. Differences in hours worked. Since women tend to work fewer hours to accommodate caregiving and other unpaid obligations, they're also more likely to work part-time, which means lower hourly wages and fewer benefits compared with full-time workers. And 4. Discrimination. Gender-based pay discrimination has been illegal since 1963, but still it's a frequent and widespread practice. It thrives more in workplaces that discourage open discussions about wages and when employees fear getting fired. Employers may also discriminate in pay when they rely on prior salary history, which could have been influenced by former discrimination, which will follow a woman to her next job. And our solutions are an increase in access to childcare. Childcare is more expensive than ever, with costs exceeding that of college tuition in many states. These high costs mean that childcare is unaffordable for many working families, especially those earning minimum wage. In many cases, it makes more financial sense for women to leave the workforce in order to take care for their children than to remain at a low-wage job that barely covers the cost of childcare. Increasing the access to affordable childcare would help narrow the gender wage gap by retaining more working mothers in the workforce. It would also help working parents better balance the demands of their families and careers. Improving work-life balance. According to the European Institute for Gender Equality, a better work-life balance could help to shrink the gender pay gap. Because women often take on additional responsibilities outside the workplace, when it comes to childcare, they may find it more challenging to balance the demands of a family and their career. This can result in women working lower paid, more flexible jobs, working only part-time, or leaving the workforce entirely. Employers that make a commitment to work-life balance can create a flexible and welcoming work environment that attracts and retains working mothers and parents. And lastly, to raise the minimum wage. Women's overrepresentation in low-wage work, such as service sector jobs and tipped employment, is one of the factors that contributes to the gender pay gap. Since women represent nearly 2/3 of workers who receive the federal minimum wage, raising the minimum wage would have an immediate effect in terms of narrowing the gender pay gap and lifting women out of poverty. Raising the minimum wage would also positively impact all low-wage workers, regardless of gender.
Political empowerment. So what exactly does it mean? To be such a widespread topic and something that combines both of our countries and worldwide, the meaning is much more unknown. To be blank, it's the process of transferring various elements such as resources, capabilities, and positions politically. But as far as the WEF and their Global Gender Gap Report are concerned, political empowerment can be measured in three principal categories. These are ratio of women in parliamentary positions. 27% was in the US in 2021. Ratio of women in ministerial positions. This doubled to 47% in 2021 in the US. And ratio of years with female or male heads of state. This was 0% in the US. So, what impact does political empowerment have on society? Political empowerment is something that is widespread and it needs to be between both genders. as being said, this is all about getting the ratio of women in these parliamentary positions up. Having both sides come in will greatly impact society in the way that voices are heard and both sides of the story are being heard, helping to further society in a positive way. Next slide, please. Okay. Here is the political empowerment score per the 2021 Global Gender Gap Report. Scores range from 0 to 1, with 1 being gender parity and total balance between men and women. As it is, the U.S. has scored lower than its neighbors Canada and Mexico, landing on 37th place with a score of 0.329 compared to Canada's 0.38. Great strides have been made since the beginning of the first report's publication in 2006, though much work still remains to be done. The principal factor dragging down the U.S. seems to be the low number of congresswomen and non-existent number of female heads of state, which is why political empowerment is so important, so this does not happen. The report for 2021 does not give numbers for the whole EU, however. The mean as a whole for the EU is 0.324, with the outliers being Finland and Romania. Eastern European countries lag behind the most.
Now, the most obvious solution to the issue of gender inequality overall is to create and sustain equal opportunities for both men and women. To be precise, this means to create free education, free healthcare, reproductive rights for women, and transparent institutions and organizations that value merits instead of gender. What we find when we see these statistics from the World Values Survey is sadly that the most unequal countries in terms of gender ratio in politics have one thing in common: traditional values. The countries that rank lowest in Europe are the following: Greece, Hungary, Cyprus, Romania, Malta, Estonia, Czech Republic, Poland, Slovakia, and Slovenia. All countries show a heavy degree of traditional religious values that the population holds. This in turn influences their education system and the expectation of both men's and women's roles in society. In Poland and Hungary, as well as in Malta, the Catholic Church holds a lot of influence over societal values and concerning what is acceptable and what is not. The real threat in America concerning women's rights is the religious lobby groups that campaign against abortion, Planned Parenthood, and promotes the view that the woman belongs in the home as a housemaker. The view that women should stay in the home, have lots of children, and become a submissive wife is one of the notions that hurts women's opportunities. The lobby campaigns hard to make sure that their views becomes policy. They have successfully managed to finance the campaigns of many conservative politicians that go to the poll promising to defend the family or the religious values they hold. A ban on lobbying would end their practices effectively and would bring a lot more comfort for the millions of women who fear their rights are taken away from them. So now, the solutions that could finally solve the problem of the gender ratio are, first of all, state secularism. Create a secular environment in society where religion is a personal habit and not a public matter. Religion has no place in public policy or in the deciding of gender roles. Religious values should not be the values of the education system, nor should it be of political organizations. Number two, ban lobbying. The religious lobby and traditionalist organizations purposely oppose women's rights. If they achieve influence, you will never, ever achieve gender equality. And number three, create equal opportunities for both men and women. And this means that in education, free healthcare, open career opportunities, and transparent institutions. If we create equal opportunities for both men and women, they can both push forward their careers. They can now fulfill their full potential.
It's no secret that gender equality is a major issue across the board, from the US to the EU. In the future, we hope to see more collaboration and harmony in the fight for equality in our nations. We ask to see a difference in societal treatment and respect between different genders. From this presentation, we would like to spread awareness of the necessity to increase both economic and political power of women. Thank you.
We would like to invite Honorable Member Evin Incir for a brief comment or question. Mrs. Incir, would you like to take the floor?
Absolutely, and thank you very much for the presentation. My spontaneous reaction to it was that, well, it is very much of social democratic proposals that you have been making. As myself belong to a social democratic party, I mean, I of course agree with almost all the proposals that you have been put forward. And what I mean with that is that equality needs to lay in the center of everything that we do. And it is evident that women historically and still are in all our member states in the EU, they're all 27, as well as in the US, far away from getting their political, economical, or social rights. So we have quite a lot to do, even though some countries are a bit further than the other countries. But as you very well pointed out in the presentation, we all have a lot to do before we can truly say that our countries are truly gender equal. And one of the most important thing, I think, in the end that you raised was the equal opportunities, and to education, equal opportunities to healthcare, to career, and to institutions, and so on. And I think connected to that, there are quite a lot of things that needs to be happen. One is that one needs to have a solid welfare state built up, and for a solid welfare state, we need to have from a social democratic point of view, a tax system that works. I myself am a very firm believer in a progressive tax system, because it's only when we together contribute to the welfare state, we also can make sure that we all together have access to the most fundamental rights in the society, as you rightly pointed out: education, healthcare, employment, and so on and so forth. I also agree totally with the issue that you raised up with secularism. I think that we need to, in all countries all around the world, differentiate between the state and the religion. Religion is a personal thing, and that's that you should choose your religion, but you should also choose it for yourself, not for everybody else. So I totally agree on that. And unfortunately, we see in some part of the world rise of right-wing nationalist conservative parties, which also leads to some of the backlashes regarding the gender equality that we see. You mentioned Poland, for example, as one of the countries where there is no division between religion and state. And that is very much correct. One very concrete example, for example, and you may have heard about the Istanbul Convention, which is the one of the most important convention, transnational or international convention addressing gender-based violence, among other things. And it's unfortunate that the National Conservative Party, for example, in Poland, have declared now that they will withdraw from the convention. So we see a backlash when it comes to gender equality, and therefore we also need to step up our efforts. So I welcome very much the proposals that you have put forward. However, there is one of the proposals that I think one could maybe, at least from my point of view, discuss a bit further, is the issue of lobbyism. And I also agree with you that lobbyism is a big problem when it comes to how decision makers decide the influence they have on decision making. Not at least in the European Parliament, we have a lot of lobbyists who are addressing us. And it could be everything from private companies, but also civil society organizations that are under the label of lobbyism, being counted as lobbyists. And for me, for example, meeting civil society organization is of importance, because it's only civil society organization or the meetings with the different actors, young people from schools all over the world, for example, and other important institutions that I have the possibility, for example, to be briefed on issues that might not be necessarily my strongest side, but would be important for me to get briefed on, to get stronger on. But however, I think that we need to, if I take the European Parliament perspective, that we need to be more transparent on which of the lobbyist organizations, even if regardless of if it's civil society or private companies or other institutions that we are meeting. Today, we have a system in place which doesn't make it mandatory for you to put the names of the organizations that you meet, but I think that we should look a bit more further into how to make it even more transparent, maybe even a bit more mandatory than it is today. But with this said, I'm really very much impressed by the work that you have done and the presentation that you have made.
Thank you so much, Ms. Incir. My name is Erica Smiley. I'm very excited for this opportunity and to meet with all of you. I teach mainly U.S. history to 11th grade students. This class that you are meeting with is my Advanced Placement United States History and Advanced Placement Government and Politics class. So I just wanted to say hello and thank you to everybody. Next up, we have the committee representatives from Equality in Age. So you guys have the floor.
Just a second, I'm gonna see. Okay, so hello everyone. We are group number 2, consisting of me, Anna, Emilia, Jens, Amanda, Lina, Ella, Casper, and Sam. And we are going to be discussing the problem of age discrimination. So, what is age discrimination? Age discrimination, also known as ageism, is stereotyping and/or discriminating against individuals or groups on the basis of their age. This may be casual or it may be systemic. Today, we are going to run through the topic of what causes age discrimination, legislation regarding the issue, as well as age discrimination in the US, age discrimination in Sweden, and then age discrimination, some solutions for the problem.
So, what causes age discrimination? What happened? Amanda, we can see the presentation.
Sorry, technical difficulties.
Okay, so What causes age discrimination? Today, in this presentation, we will mainly focus on age discrimination towards teenagers or elderly in the workforce. So many employers are less likely to hire these age groups in fear that they will not properly do the work. And when hiring teenagers, many employers may worry about an eventual lack of maturity or responsibility. And when hiring elders, employers may fear health problems affecting their ability to work. So these are two different examples and two different assumptions an employer can make based on age. Next slide.
All right, so now let's go through a little bit about existing legislation that has to do with age discrimination. Both in the US and in the European Union, there are laws supposed to protect workers from being discriminated against because of their age. In the US, the Age Discrimination in Employment, also known as ADEA, makes it clear that discrimination against people above the age of 40 is forbidden. However, it does not include people under the age of 40, but some states do have laws that do so. The European Union has since year 2000 legislation that serves to protect people of all ages from being discriminated against in work and employment because of their age. You are protected in the workplace, so to speak. And so, for instance, if you believe that you are being treated in a certain way that is unfair and that has to do with your age, there is a law there to help you. Next slide, please.
So like we said, that there are laws against age discrimination, and age discrimination is different than a lot of these other areas because it isn't as well known. So some examples of age discrimination in the US is that an AARP survey showed that 3 in 5 older workers, so those over the age of 40, say they have seen or experienced age discrimination in the workplace. And this can range from the hiring experience to on-the-job training and also to termination. And the existing legislation, like we've said, is only for workers over the age of 40. And it's very rare that we have some kind of legislation to protect those that are younger. But in recent years, younger workers have seen an increase in discrimination, predominantly in white-collar corporations. They've stemmed away from hiring millennials, and with the belief that they want everything handed to them, which is obviously not true, but it is easier for employers to categorize generations and thus discriminating against them based on their age or their generation. Next slide.
Yes, according to the Source Union, there are ideas that young people are more innovative, ambitious regarding work. From IFAU, an Institute for Labor and Education Policy in Sweden, after a study shows that after 40 years old, employers begin to opt out of people. Many employers believe that the ability to learn new things and to be adaptable and flexible, that these qualities decline with age. Researchers can see that the ability to be quick to absorb information decreases the older you get, but there is also something that improves, which is that previous experiences make it easier to see patterns and contexts.
Discrimination regarding age is sometimes seen when we speak about stereotypes. For instance, older people are characterized and portrayed as grumpy and bitter, sometimes even distant and confused. And younger people, on the other hand, are characterized as loud, disrespectful, and not very well behaved. This might lead us to have preconceived thoughts and opinions about each other. We can also see age discrimination in terms of gender. Women are not allowed to age the same way as men. Women are provided with hair dye, facial creams to prevent wrinkles, and so on, while men are told to embrace their aging features.
Okay, so what are some solutions to age discrimination or ageism? First of all, lowering the minimum employment age in the US. Lowering the minimum employment age could normalize having younger people in the workforce. This would lead to a more age diverse workforce and may lead to more accepting work environments. Taking age out of job applications. Taking age out of job applications is beneficial for the younger workers who don't have all that much experience. Meaning, instead of looking at age and experience, you could look at the merits and ambition of the worker. Engaging the workers. Engaging the workers is also a way to furthermore improve and include workers of different ages. Often older workers are stuck in a certain position due to lack of training. This could lead to them wanting to retire or just accept the fact that they're stuck in that position. This could also be said for younger workers who have had the same position since the day they started. Enlighten the stereotypes and try to break them. Enlightening the stereotypes is easier said than done, but it's the ideal solution to the problem. Enlightening or embracing certain stereotypes, such as older people needing more sick days or younger workers being unreliable, is in certain cases a fact. And rather than pointing out these flaws on a daily basis and just accepting them, would let us focus on the other matters. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, and we would like to invite a member of European Parliament, Ms. Incir, for a brief comment.
Thank you very much. I, of course, continue being impressed also by this presentation. I think a lot of very important things that has been raised, but I also want to add that in the Europe, you very rightly mentioned about the legislation that we have in place about discrimination at the labor market, but there is also another legislation. Unfortunately, that one is stuck. And it is stuck in the what we call for the European Council, and that's where the heads of states are, like the prime ministers and so on, are sitting. And for that legislation, it needs a unanimous decision. And what that legislation does is to make sure to address and address discrimination in all parts of society. It's a bit broader than the one that only addresses the labor market. For example, it also contains of the educational system, housing market, the relations with the different institutions, and so on and so forth. So a bit broader. That one, actually, me and some colleagues are trying to make the council and the heads of states to understand that it's time to take the inequalities and it's time to take discrimination more seriously than they have taken until now. And unfortunately, also, we do not have solid or good enough legislations in place on a national level. And therefore, why I'm very much pushing for this legislation that I was just talking about. It's called Horizontal Anti-Discrimination Directive. Also, I mean, I started my engagement actually in politics. I know Peter Kvist said that encourage you to join the diplomatic corps, but I would also want to encourage you to try the path of politics, because I myself actually started at very young age in engaged in politics too. One of the things that I was very much angry of was the discrimination against young people. So one of the first thing I did when I became a couple of years after I became a member of my youth organization and my party was that I was, I think in the age of 20, I was elected into the municipality. One of the things that we were pushing forward was housing for young people, because also it is very challenging as a young person to access housing if you don't have rich parents, or if you yourself, because of some reason, have the money to buy an apartment, and that's not how it should be. So we have many challenges, so to say, when it comes to age discrimination for young people, but of course also when it comes to elderly. As you very rightly also pointed out, when you reach a certain age, you are seen as by some employers as not productive enough, or you will not be contributing as well as people in another age span, and so on and so forth. So we really need to combat age discriminations on all levels. So thank you very much for the presentation you just made.
Thank you, MEP Incir, for your presence and your engagement. We are now moving on into the second part of the event. Mr. Kvist and Mr. Lin, we're looking forward to sharing our work with you and to hear your views. But first, Committee C will present.
Well, and I guess it's my job to introduce the next group. My name is Suzanne Fogstrom, and I am a teacher at Hvitfeldtska Upper Secondary School here in Gothenburg, working together with Magnus here next to me. I teach English and I teach physical education here at Hvitfeldtska, and I've had the honor to meet this group of students from Sweden for the past 2 years, teaching them some English. I would now like to introduce Committee C, which they have focused on equality of origin. So please, can group number C start their presentation?
Excuse me, I'm intervening just a second because I know that MEP Incir might not be able to stay with us for the whole duration of the event. So I just want to thank you again for your presence and let you know that from now on you're free to leave to continue with your work whenever you need. We're very happy with you staying, but we understand that you have more work to do and other appointments. So we just want to thank you for being here with us. Ms. Incir.
Thank you very much for inviting me. It has really been a pleasure, and I really look forward to follow the work that you are doing. And I should also, it was a bit mentioned before, I myself from Gothenburg. I was not attending Hvitfeldtska, but Schillerska Gymnasiet, which is close to Hvitfeldtska, neighbor to Hvitfeldtska Gymnasiet. But I really want to thank you all and keep up the good work, and I look forward to follow your work. Have a nice following or continued discussion. Bye-bye.
Bye, thank you.
Thank you.
Our group, we were tasked with why we shouldn't be discriminated based on our race or origin, and we chose to talk about Black Lives Matter since it was an organization fighting against racial inequality. It's first swept the nation by storm, and I mean the world by storm, shown through massive protests and riots. And since it's a global organization, we were able to compare and contrast how different and drastic the movement is in different countries. Black Lives Matter, the BLM movement was co-founded as an online movement in 2013 by 3 Black community organizers. They formed BLM after the killing of Trayvon Martin in 2012, shot by George Zimmerman. Demonstrations demanding his prosecution were held in cities across the United States. His acquittal in July 2013 was widely perceived as a miscarriage of justice and led to further nationwide protests. The movement later expanded due to many more killings of Black people, and the hashtag also grew in social media as a result. The Black Lives Matter movement has brought attention to systemic racism in the justice system and highlighted police brutality. The abuse also extends to institutional racism within the social, environmental, and economic structures and directly affects systemic and oral health. Segregation still also remains as one of the most commonly used mechanisms to enforce institutional racism. Segregation has forced underrepresented minorities to reside in neighborhoods separate from white groups. Slavery, racist laws, racist attitudes, and many other things has caused the United States to segregate white and non-white people for centuries. BLM is therefore not only an organization to stop police brutality, but also to stop structural racism, which is a result of segregation in the U.S. With other words, the underlying causes. I'd like to hand it over to Phoebe.
Thank you. So I'm going to be talking about the triggering causes. On May 25th, 2020, George Floyd died after a police arrest in Minneapolis, Minnesota, USA. Floyd was unarmed during the arrest, but according to the Minneapolis Police Department, he appeared suffering from mental distress and intoxication. Floyd matched a description of a man who tried to use a counterfeit $20 bill given to the police. Therefore, the police arrested him. After Floyd refused to leave his car, the police forced him down on the ground by physical force. Floyd later died due to the deadly poison he held in by the officers. Deadly position he was held in by the officers. During the time of his death, he suffered repeatedly and said, "I can't breathe," which the officers didn't listen to. After Floyd died in the hands of U.S. police, the Black Lives Matter movement took form once again, with protests spreading around the U.S. and eventually around the world, with a message against police brutality and racist behavior. Let me go to the next slide. In the United States, when the Black Lives Matter movement began, in the U.S., many people came together to protest. Over 500,000 people protested in over 550 locations in the United States. Many of these protests were peaceful. Some of the protests turned into riots. There were over 580 riots in the United States. Multiple buildings and businesses were burned and destroyed. There was vandalism and even murder. If we look at Sweden, the protests were mainly peaceful. There were thousands of people all around the country who showed their support for the BLM movement. However, there were some protests that escalated and turned into riots. In Gothenburg, for instance, a small group of people vandalized police cars, windshields, etc. Now I would like to hand over the word to Norbert.
Yes. So to better understand this issue, we've looked at statistics in two places, those being economic and crime. Understanding demographics also helps us to understand the scale of these issues and statistics. So you'll notice that, for example, the Swedish demographics are by nationality instead of origin. And this is because the question of race here is not as prevalent, and we rather look towards nationality. So looking at the chart now, you'll notice the net worth of the white non-Hispanic group is much higher than all the others combined. You also notice the sharp decline in 2008 is as a result of the financial crisis in the same year. And you can also see that several groups have had varying results of recovery. Next slide. Next slide. So if we look now at the crime, we decided to look at xenophobia in crime specifically. Now, in the US, in the year 2019, it was 57.6% of all reported crimes containing single bias, meaning a sole motive, were identified with xenophobic motives. And if we look at Sweden, for a long while now, there have been moderate amounts of crime linked with xenophobia up until 2014, when we see an alarming increase, which coincides with the migrant crisis of the same year. And since then, the number of crimes linked with xenophobia have remained high. It is also worth noting that both Sweden and the US have a history of movements or groups or even individuals alone inspired by xenophobia, with some still around today.
Yes, and I'm going to tell you about what the Black Lives Matter movement actually achieved. So a good thing the movement contributed to is that police reforms have been enforced all over the United States in order to prevent discrimination and abuse of power from the police. The police officers who are responsible for the death of George Floyd have also been held accountable and are right now actually facing trial. Then some monuments and statues with questionable backgrounds, like, for example, those who portray Confederate generals, have been teared down. And some school districts in the US have also agreed to adopt policies in order to desegregate schools and increase racial equality. But unfortunately, some bad things were also caused by the movement. During some of the protests, as already said, people were very violent, and it also led to some properties being damaged, which also led to the Black Lives Matter movement getting a lot of criticism. And now I'm going to hand the word over to Hanna.
Yes, so possible solutions. Fight segregation in society and school, such as make the students attend their closest schools will increase diversity. Students tend to travel long distance for a less diverse school. Fight norms through education. Teach students how racial norms arose to prevent in the future. Also discuss the problems in the schools for a better understanding and for students to be more aware. And promote racial discussions about the equality, and also expand awareness campaigns. For an example, hashtag Stop Online Abuse from the English Football Association, and if that could expand. Forcing accountability and enforcing stricter guidelines. Social media is a breeding ground for abuse of all kinds. Companies may want to take strict actions against users who actively promote abuse. Thank you for listening.
We would like to invite Mr. Kist and Mr. Lin for comment or question.
Would you like to go first, Joe?
No, please go ahead. I'll go second.
So thank you so much. I thought this was an incredibly interesting presentation. I think you captured very well, the core of these issues and the movements we've seen over the past this past time. I think it's very important, as you've done, to look beyond individual acts between one individual and another, and to see the trends, and see the aggregated situation. And this is where you, when you take that step back, this is where you actually can identify discrimination and racism. And I think, just as you highlighted here between the US and Sweden, racism and discrimination is a truly global issue that we're all struggling with domestically, and in the case of Sweden and the US, are trying to come to terms with globally as well. One issue that you didn't touch upon, but that I find quite interesting as well, in terms of discrimination based on origin, you focus very much on the Black Lives Matter movement. But on origin, we've also seen an increase in hate crimes against Asians, for example. And there's a paradox there that many people who left their countries left because they didn't like the policies that those countries were pursuing. And then they arrived to their new countries and they're being criticized for those exact policies. So that's perhaps just an interesting thing for future discussions. But again, I was very impressed, and thank you so much. I really enjoyed taking part of
this. This issue is pretty near and dear to my heart. I represent the United States as an American diplomat, but I have to say, overseas, so many people ask me if I'm really an American based on the color of my skin. And so I understand where where racism in the US is, it's just not in the US, it's everywhere. People struggle with trying to, I think, the difficulty of understanding people who don't look or think like themselves. I wanted to first just say that it was an amazing presentation. I loved how you clarified what has happened and discussed, gone through, taken the steps of the events and how it affected Sweden, the United States. And I really like your solutions. It's tough because in the United States, racism is a huge part of a history. And I think it's something that a lot of other countries don't struggle with as much. Of course, it exists in other countries, but for the United States, it's something that we have trouble explaining or even providing a solution. And we see the effects of racism, of slavery and racism today. So I'll just share with you, it's what you've done today was very difficult because I too have a very difficult job explaining to my foreign counterparts what this means. And I thought you actually probably did a better job than I did. And one thing I just wanted to positively highlight is the part about awareness and dialogue. Awareness is really the best way to get people on the same page. How are you able to know what it feels to be in the shoes of someone else without knowing that or without discussing? So that's extremely important that we continue to talk about it, that we just don't say, you know, this was over a year ago and now we're moving on. No, it continues to be a systemic issue. And I kind of just wanted to caution one thing before I finish my my piece, was that, you know, I think there can be a lot of anger about this, but anger is not the solution. Anger could drive us to find solutions, but the real solution is with love and grace and understanding one another. So I encourage you all, it's these events that have happened, our country is still healing, but we really need to come together as a country to solve this issue. There's a tremendous polarization in our nation right now. There are many supporters of the Black Lives Matters movement, but there are also counter protesters as well. And I think people are generally trying to do good and what's best for them, but we really need to come to an understanding. So I encourage you to continue to bridge the gap in your conversations. Be slow to anger, but really try to understand one another, and I think present your arguments in the calmest, most logical fashion. I'm confident, that this generation, at least the young people here, have taken this matter seriously, and that's it. It is a breath of relief for me that you guys are championing this, and I feel like I can't say enough that you guys are the hope of our future, and that as long as you continue to address these issues and to seek common ground, I think we'll be okay. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kvist and Mr. Lin. That was very powerful. So appreciate that. Next up on our list is Committee D. They will present equal rights to participate in democratic elections.
Yeah, we will, as said, work with... Just wait a little bit, we have some technical difficulties. Yeah, as said, we will speak about democracy in America and in Europe with a focus on Hungary and Eastern Europe.
So I will be talking about the current situation in Europe, or more specifically, the current democratic situation in Hungary and the Balkan. So according to the organization Freedom House report from 2020, Hungary is no longer counted as a semi-consolidated democracy. Instead, Hungary is categorized as a transitional/hybrid regime. Hungary, or the Prime Minister of Hungary, Viktor Orban, has tightened his grip on institutions like universities and public education. Hungary became a member of the European Union back in 2004 when they were still counted as a democracy. The fact that Hungary still is a part of the European Union has been criticized because of the Copenhagen criteria, which are the rules that define whether a country is eligible to join the Union or not, clearly says that stable institutions guaranteeing democracy, the rule of law, human rights, and respect for minorities are okay to join the Union, among with other criteria, but Hungary does no longer meet these requirements. And Poland is going in the same direction, and democracy in the Balkan is eroding because of Chinese and Russian influence. But Jesper will talk more about that later.
I'm going to discuss the current primarily democratic situation in the US, which is that citizens are able to express their voice in democratic elections via voting. This is primarily via presidential, midterm, state, and local elections. This allows you to exercise your democratic voice via voting for the candidates you prefer, that also in turn represent your personal views. Citizens can also voice their views and attempt to cause change via the press or the media. We are able to also petition and peacefully protest. And again, you can bring up issues you have in federal, state, and local courts.
The causes of democratic decline in Europe are many, but some can easily be seen in Hungary and the Eastern Bloc. The first failure in most democratic systems is weak institutions. Institutions function as a defense against forces trying to limit the rights of the people. In Hungary, these defenses have been notoriously weak, allowing for anti-democratic policies and rhetoric to take effect within a short period of time without question. Weak institutions also allow an external force to hinder democracy in the Eastern Bloc. The Chinese Communist Party is hindering the people of the Eastern Bloc to make their own informed decisions by running influence campaigns to spread misinformation, using large amounts of debt as diplomatic leverage against several of the countries in the Eastern Bloc, and have also installed surveillance systems in even more. There are few alternatives for these countries. Authoritarian leaders are rarely challenged by other parties, which hinders the people's choice to choose their own government. Many of the Eastern Bloc countries' leaders have few incentives also to not allow China to influence their population or go into debt in return for huge investments in infrastructure or industry. Response from the rest of the world has been slow, and the critic is often not focused on making clear demands. The lack of a united response has allowed for some changes to go mostly unnoticed or unpunished. One important factor to take notice of is that most people living in declining democracies still believe in a democratic system. More than not, is the people not to blame for declining democracy in most countries. Next slide.
Possible solutions. To stop the democratic decline in Hungary, for example, the EU could take certain measures in order to persuade the Hungarian government. For example, the EU could use what is called the nuclear option, the Article 7, which strips Hungary of its voting rights within the EU. The problem with this, however, is that Poland supports Hungary, and if not all member states except Hungary in this case vote for a use of Article 7, Article 7 can't be used. Another option that ensures democracy now and in the future is a mechanism in the budget that will cease funding of a country if it doesn't meet the Copenhagen criteria, which is the criteria for joining the European Union. And I think it's fair to say that Hungary doesn't meet those criteria. Next slide, please.
The limitations on democratic voice diverging from the European side is primarily recently there's been a lot of proposed limitations on absentee ballots. This is mainly in southern areas such as Texas, Georgia, and Florida, which would significantly make it harder for working class military personnel and those residing, especially like students, college students mainly, residing outside of the state that they're actually registered to vote in. Another issue is that many minorities and people living in impoverished conditions or having difficult financial standings don't feel able to cast their vote. It could be a transportation issue. It could be they aren't properly educated and they feel that it is pointless to actually vote. There's also a major, especially with the working and lower classes, distrust in the government that has arisen because of global and internal conflict. For example, the Vietnam War, and even recently you can look at the Black Lives Matter protest, which caused some tearing within the country. There is also a lot of biased and censored information that can make it harder for citizens to fully understand and grasp political issues, and it can sway them in one area or the other. Next slide, please. Some possible solutions for this could be increasing participation in our primary or midterm elections, which could be supported by simply educating a wider population, because many don't want to vote in the primary midterms because they don't fully grasp or understand the importance of it, and they also, again, feel that their voice is not needed in those situations. We could also provide better access to voting stations and education on political issues for the middle class and lower classes, because again, it's not easy to get, and that turns into better funding and publicizing for neutral media, which would make people feel better educated on political issues. The biased media often interferes with people getting their democratic voice out because they don't feel that it's fully backed with proper information. And that is all we have to say today. Thank you.
And I would like to invite Mr. Kvist and Mr. Lin for a comment or question.
Yeah, sure. I can go first. I love this presentation because I feel that the discussions that you've had as a group are the same discussions that we have here and in Brussels and in Washington. We're trying to figure out what to do with backsliding democracies, which is an incredible problem. And I really like how you broke it down to several of the influences that are contributing to this backsliding. I don't have an answer. You know, I think I would love to take your solutions and implement them all, because it's a difficult thing to say, you know, because democracies are for the people, but you know, and should be and decisions should be made by the people. But when you have influences coming in that are probably unduly influencing people, what do you do? And how do you respond in a democratic fashion? How do you let people decide when they want to choose an undemocratic way? These are the things that we struggle with, and so I really am impressed with your analysis of it, of how you see the problem. And I also like the fact of how you contrasted it with what's happening in the United States, and that, you know, it's really no democracies are safe. Like, you know, we have to continually moving forward. If we don't, we're going to start sliding as well. So I like how you paid attention to some of the things happening in states with voting issues. And bringing up media. I don't know. I have a difficult time. I read the news all the time, and it's really difficult to know what's true out there. I have to do a balancing act where I read one website or one news site, and then I have to read sort of the opposite news site. And I try to find the truth somewhere in the middle. What I'm saying is, it's difficult, and I encourage you to think for yourselves. Just don't take the news for its word. Use some of, you know, all that, the education that you've been getting, and think, does this make sense? And try to figure out your own, what's really happening. And that's unfortunate that we had this, that apparently the news is so highly volatile right now, and especially influences from social media. But please, you know, just try to be as balanced as possible and try to figure it out, because I too have struggled with finding out what the news really is and what I should trust and not trust. That's it for me.
All right, I was also very impressed by the presentation, also because as with Joe, this is something I discuss here with my counterparts every day, and this is something that's really on the top of our minds right now. And it's also an area where the US and Sweden is very much like-minded, and we're prioritizing this to the same degree. A couple of years ago, my foreign ministry, they launched something called the Drive for Democracy. It's basically placing democracy and human rights at the center of everything we do to counter this backsliding. Sorry about my camera. And our U.S. partners with the new Biden administration is taking a very much similar approach, and they're leading up to now preparing for a summit for democracy at the end of the year or the beginning of next year. So incredibly timely topic in every way. And as Joe alluded to, I mean, it is also a very difficult topic. We've seen, unfortunately, now authoritarian rise where they want to. I think it used to be more of an issue between democracies and dictatorships, where dictators wanted to be left alone so that they could manage their own population. I think the last 10 years or so, we've seen an increased move towards a more of an ideological struggle between democracy and authoritarianship that we really need to be mindful of. So I was impressed with the way that you highlighted the challenges in both Europe and the US and suggested solutions that can come to terms with these things. I was also thinking about the media as Joe, and it is very difficult. I think these days media consumers have to be educated. We have to demand a lot of our media consumers, and it's a difficult task to make sure that we have our own kind of resilience towards disinformation, be it domestic or foreign. And this is speaking purely on a private note or a personal note. I'm a little bit concerned that also in Sweden we have now a debate over our public service television. Is it biased? Is it not biased? Should we defund it? I find that discussion very troubling, because as the group highlighted, that's kind of how it started in Hungary. That this is where it starts, and it's a slippery slope from there. I'm definitely not saying that Sweden is on that same trajectory in any way at all, but just that we need to be mindful of the small steps. I think in terms of the EU, what you were mentioning, one of the solutions that you mentioned, placing conditionality to Hungary's and perhaps Poland's as well, EU funds based on their how well they perform in the rule of law and democracy. That's actually something that's being put in place now. Our MEP would have been able to speak better towards that, but that's actually something that I'm quite hopeful will be put in place. So very good for you to identify that as well. And hopefully, in a year's time, you'll be able to say, we got that right, now it's in place, and we were thinking the same thing. So thank you again, extremely interesting discussion.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Kvist and Mr. Lin. Magnus Misling, I'm back again. I'm the civic teacher from Gothenburg, and I would like to thank you for your interesting and very informative comments, actually, on this presentation. And actually, what I forgot before is I would like to thank another person who is in the background here. That is Kim Jackson, the IT department in the United States. She has been making this possible, helping us really, really much. And I also would like to say something about there will be a text in English sent to the European Parliament Liaison Office in Washington DC, and also to Stockholm, written by one of the Swedish students, Emilia Sergey. So she will write in English, and she will email this to you as a kind of a journalist today. And with those words, I would like to introduce Committee E, who has been working with the subject equal right to education. So the Committee E, the last committee, go forward.
Okay, hi all. My name is Hugo, and me and David, Jasmine, Vilma, Axel, Nils, Hayden, and Jacob had made this presentation about the right to equal education. And we're mainly focusing on the current state of education in both Sweden and the United States, and also some problems and solutions that you can take into consideration. So next slide, please, and welcome, Jacob.
Education within the U.S. Within the U.S., every child is allowed equal access to education, no matter their race, ethnic background, religion, sex, or financial status. Even children who've come into the U.S. illegally are allowed to go to public schools for free. Even though education is not a fundamental right under the Constitution, it is still protected under the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment, which protects people from discrimination based on race and gender. Also, equal protection in schools is also protected by agencies like the ACLU.
Yes, and in Sweden, we, as America, we also have equal access to education for everyone. But one big difference between Sweden and America is that higher education in Sweden is free. So the only costs of going to university here is basically housing and necessities, like, for example, food. In Sweden, we also have the free school choice. So in some instances, you are allowed to choose your own elementary school. And in high school, you have a varying amount of different programs, for example, and different schools to choose from in your city. And Swedish students also get a monthly stipend. This is only for high school students.
and it's roughly $120 every month. But you only get this if your attendance is high enough. So it's almost like it's almost to encourage the Swedish students to actually take school seriously.
Causes/reasons for equal education. The United States did not always have equal education. Discrimination based on sex was legal in the US until Title IX came out in 1972, which guaranteed the right to equal education free from sex discrimination. Also, discrimination based on race used to be legal in the US due to Supreme Court's decision in Plessy versus Ferguson, where the Supreme Court said that segregation was legal within schools as long as buildings were equal in quality. This was eventually overturned in the Supreme Court's decision in Brown versus Education on May 17, 1954, where the Supreme Court ruled that racial segregation in schools was unconstitutional.
Yes, and in Sweden we also have strived for equal education, and for a long time it has been government mandated for effective education, and that has been the primary goal for it. And in 1992, the government legalized or opened up for private school choice, which have showed some differences or even decline in the PISA results. Thank you.
Consequences and effects of equal education. Some positive effects of equal education within the US is that everyone is supposed to have equal opportunities within the school system, which should then allow everyone to have equal opportunities when it comes to colleges and job opportunities. Although this sounds good in theory, it does not always happen in practice. While schools are legally supposed to have equality, this can vary based on regions within the country. This can happen due to multiple reasons such as funding, race distribution, and lack of equity within schools. In contrast to American private schools, Sweden's free schools don't charge tuition. They draw on government funds to operate and are required to follow Sweden's national curriculum, which means less laissez-faire, which is deeply important to American society. They're more comparable to American charter schools, which are publicly funded but privately ran.
Yes, and like Jacob mentioned just recently, a very positive effect of equal education in Sweden is that everyone follows the same curriculum, because it allows for equal opportunities for postgraduate studies. But a very big consequence for the Swedish education system because of equal education being a sharp drop in quality of Swedish schools as a whole. Like David also mentioned earlier, Sweden has had a very sharp decline in the PISA rankings, and that has been very troubling statistics for a lot of for the government concerning education in Sweden. And another problem with the free school choice in Sweden is that the prevalence of well-performing students is very unequal between schools, because when everyone can choose their own school, there tends to be schools where a lot of high-performing students go, and some schools that get left behind.
All right, spending per student by school district chart. This chart shows the spending per student by school district within the United States. This distribution of wealth is one of the main problems in schooling within the US. This distribution of wealth shows students in districts with higher spending to have more academic opportunities, which could give them an advantage when it comes to college and job opportunities.
Graduation rates vary greatly across the country, with the lowest graduation rates occurring in the southeastern part of the country. This variety of graduation rates can be caused by many factors, including academic failure, attendance/preparation, disengagement, pregnancy, financial difficulties, and mental health issues.
Problems with the U.S. education. Even though the U.S. has a good education system compared to other countries, there are still many flaws within it. Among these flaws, we believe that some of the most important is the lack of meritocracy in the American education system in contrast to the Swedish equivalent. By this, we mean that unlike other countries like Sweden and the U.S., there seems to be the use of race/gender as a prominent factor, just like ACT and SAT scores or GPA scores, when it comes to accepting applicants for college in the same cases. Though colleges aren't allowed to use racial quotas, they are allowed to participate in affirmative action. This is upheld in the Supreme Court decision of Gutler versus Bolliger. Another problem that we would like to try and fix within the U.S. education system is the overwhelming price of colleges. The average cost of tuition and fees of the United States school system in 2020 to 2021 school year was $41,411 for private colleges and $11,171 for state residents and public colleges. Let's see. The fact that in-state tuition prices among national public universities has risen from 72% from 2008 to 2021 is not comforting either.
Possible solutions for the lack of meritocracy. Most possible solutions for the lack of meritocracy are simple to implement, from making colleges acceptance rates strictly on ACT, SAT, GPA, and extracurricular activities rather than diversity goals. A current example of affirmative action is the Harvard admissions scandals, in which Harvard University was caught filing racial quotas in which hundreds of Asian students were denied solely because of their race and allowed hundreds of African American students in a place just on the basis of race. 10 states have banned affirmative action in public colleges, such as California, Texas, Idaho, Washington, Florida, Michigan, Nebraska, Arizona, New Hampshire, and Oklahoma. The problem can be fixed by colleges accepting students based on their merit via GPA, ACT, SAT, and not based on race or ethnicity. You could implement schools that don't partake in affirmative action while still having a couple within the country if you have fear of lack of opportunity with some races.
Possible solutions for high cost of college. Over the past 2 decades, published college tuition has increased in price more than any other good or service besides hospital care. Tuition inflation has risen at a faster rate than the cost of medical services, child care, and housing. The demand for college has increased significantly in the past few decades, and as demand rises, so too will the prices. It's a never-ending cycle of supply and demand. The Department of Education reported that the U.S. colleges saw more than 5 million more students in 2017 than in 2000. Although there is not many ways to lower tuition unless colleges choose to, which they're not going to because they're trying to run a private business, a comprehensive proposal to lower the cost of college, improve the quality of higher education through stronger accountability, and expand opportunity by providing students the support they need to succeed was brought before the House of Representatives in October of 2020. Although this sounds good in theory, allowing federal legislation and regulation into private colleges is outside of the federal government's purview. The federal government is only allowed to intervene in the private sector to protect consumers and help business. The federal government could allow more financial aid for students, especially for those who are from low-income families. This could happen through a bill being passed in the House that sets a quota for federal spending that goes through students' financial aid.
Okay, and some problems with Swedish education. One major problem that the Swedish education system faces is that schools in so-called at-risk areas tend to struggle with graduation rates. This is mostly in elementary school. And this can be attributed to a multitude of reasons, like, for example, the crime rates of these areas and the academic environment of the area as a whole. And this is a very concerning statistic for Sweden, because about a third of all students in these areas lack the grades to progress to secondary school or high school. And another problem that all Swedish students can relate to is the way grades are set, because grades are not set on your performance as a whole. It's set on a base of criteria. So you could, for example, be a student that is really good at one subject, but lacks a bit behind in one criteria, and that can result in a very unjust grade for that student, and then they may not be able to, for example, get into their dream university.
Yes, thank you, Hugo. And as Hugo mentions, one of the bigger problems is the differentiating quality of education in Sweden. And as you can see here, this is statistics in Swedish, and I will try to translate it. So what you see here on the screen is a graph showing some of the major suburbs in Swedish cities, and it shows the percentage of students not eligible for senior high school. These are graduating junior high school students. And what are some solutions for bettering the quality or more equal quality of education in the Swedish schools? Well, there has been the topic of nationalizing the schools. Currently, they are municipality funded and run. But if they are state funded and run, we can instead distribute the wealth so it's more equal. And because the problem now is in some municipalities they have more larger tax base, and therefore they can prioritize their schools better. But also, as we have mentioned, these at-risk neighborhoods, what can we do to improve the students' grades there? So that just isn't only a school problem, but you have to lift up the neighborhoods and improve them as a whole. And for that to be done, you have to allocate resources to a lot of different, and every institution in society would have to cooperate for this to happen, like social services, police, schools. It would have to be a broad effort if we want to see positive change. Thank you. And with that, I would thank you for listening to our presentation. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. Another great presentation. You guys are doing really fantastic work. I'm really impressed. So again, another difficult but very interesting topic. And I understand this is, of course, very, very close to your heart. You have skin in the game, as they say, studying yourselves. I have personally 2 young daughters, and so I also have skin in the game. And this is something we thought a lot about when we moved to the US about a year ago. There's this whole discussion, which school are you going to attend? And then based on that, which area you're going to live in? So I think your observations around the quality of school and what it does for the local community is very interesting and very correct. I think based on that own experience and in many discussions with parents, I think you're right that you need to lift the community around. But I also think that if you raise the quality of the school, people will make an effort to go there. I think the issue there's perhaps an issue of diversity, but I think the issue of quality is even more pertinent. I think many parents would be happy to send their kids to the closest school, no matter what the student ratio in different levels look like, if they only knew that the quality of education was really good. So to me, that's a key topic that you touched upon. One thing that came to mind when you highlighted that Swedish higher education is free, because I say this a lot, but then sometimes my US counterparts say, it's not free, it's paid for by taxes. So we need to remember that as well. It's not magically free in Sweden. It's just a different way of looking at it and a different way of financing it. That being said, I'm a huge proponent for tax-financed higher education, but just to keep that in mind. And on the U.S. side, I'll let Joe knows much better than me, of course. But it's interesting with these with the extremely high tuition rates in some places. What we see, I mean, the positive side of that, we see, of course, that the U.S. has some of the absolutely best universities in the world. I don't have the statistics in front of me, but perhaps 7 out of the 10 best universities in the world are in the U.S. And they produce research and quality of education that has huge benefits for society. On the downside, of course, you don't want that to be just for an exclusive group. And no matter if you're kind of left-leaning or right-leaning in politics, we tend to agree that everyone at least is entitled to a fair start. So that's where I think, you know, that there needs to be kind of a basic quality in Sweden and as everywhere. And I think that's where the idea of affirmative action comes from as well, to kind of break generational cycles where certain groups never have the chance to break out of poverty or just a lesser education, which is also worth keeping in mind. But again, another great presentation on a great topic. I wish I could be there to take part of your discussions, because I can tell that they've been really fantastic discussions, and it's great to see the perspectives from both sides of the pond. So congratulations again.
Thank you, Peter. So like Peter, I've got 2 daughters, and the way things look for college, it looks like I will never be able to retire. So this is a problem that keeps me up at night. But I think we'll be okay. I just want to give you a 3 points on the presentations. A solution, to go back on meritocracy is to just focus on test scores and things like that, things that are that will sort of sort out any of the other influences that are not based on like purely testing. I just wanted to maybe look a little bit into it, because there is some testing bias, and I don't know about you, but I am not a great test taker. And so even though I think I know the material, I don't do well on tests. And I feel like I was often penalized for that. My wife, on the other hand, is a fantastic test taker, and she just destroys these tests, has excellent marks. And I don't know how she does it. So, but I learned that she had been taking test prep since she was in junior high for the SATs. And she was only able to do that because of her parents paid for extra schooling, extra tutoring, extra classes. So just wanted to think about who is able to pay for extra SAT, ACT prep classes. And so this is another factor where, though maybe on the surface it is fair, the preparation itself might not be as equal as you might think. My second point is about PISA scores. And just to say, PISA scores are, maybe been coming down. I know the United States haven't been the top. I just wanted to say that don't be too depressed on it, because PISA score, once again, is just how well you take a test. I'm going to say, look at the bright side of it. If you look at the United States and you look at Sweden, like pretty much, Sweden is actually has the most amount of billion-dollar startups per capita in the world, next to Silicon Valley. And what that means is both our countries are extremely innovative, and the education, and you have to thank your teachers a lot for this, is just not about taking a test, but it's teaching students how to think, how to solve problems, how to look at things differently. So just wanted to let you know that the education you're getting right now, both in Gothenburg and also in North Carolina, is excellent. It is bar none one of the best in the world. So don't just, PISA scores, I've got something against that. But anyways, and my third point is jobs. The way that education and colleges go, they follow where the job market is heading. And so the demand for college is increasing because more companies were asking for more college graduates. If you look at back in the day, 50 years ago, there weren't as many college graduates. And as more and more competitive it's become, it's actually less demanding now. If you look at the biggest tech firms, Google, Facebook, and probably another one, or Amazon, they have made a requirement, they've come out with an announcement that they no longer require college degrees for their hiring. And if you ask any young person, Generation Y or millennial, like, who do you want to work for? They want to work for these big tech companies, and they no longer require college degrees. And the answer is clear, because it's not indicative of a person's performance or measure. And you can't judge someone's ability to be a contributing worker just based on college. And so what they're doing now is that these tech companies are creating their own programs, or if you can say online universities, that if you take this course and you can pass it, you can code, you can do what we're looking for, you can work for Google, or you can work for a company. And that's something, and they're actually hiring also people from academia, professors, to work for them, to teach their people, because they're looking for talent. And so they're actually taking it away from academia. So you see this transition in digitalization where like companies are no longer subscribing to the traditional trends of education success, but they're looking beyond that, because they understand that the education system is somewhat broken, and not always the best and the brightest are getting college degrees, and they don't necessarily need it. But I'm saying, I'm not telling you no one go to college, and I would get in trouble for that. But I'm saying is that, the education sphere is changing. And it'll be really interesting to look at the future to see what companies are doing, because I guarantee that the universities will follow what the companies are doing to hire the best and the brightest. So that's it.
Thank you for that, Mr. Lin. With that, we'd like to bring the North Carolina Sweden chapter of Bridge the Pond to the close. Thank you, Mr. Milak and Mrs. Christiana Roth, for making this dialogue possible, and well as our dedicated teachers. Thank you also to the diplomats of the U.S. Embassy in Sweden and the Embassy of Sweden in Washington, D.C. for their presence here with us today.
We'd like to thank member of the European Parliament, Incir, for their attending and listening to the work we've done over the last few weeks. Finally, we want to thank Mr. Peter Kvist from the Embassy of Sweden and Mr. Joseph Lin from the United States Embassy in Stockholm for joining. Mr. Kvist, would you like to take the floor for a conclusive remark?
Perhaps again, just say thank you. It's been a privilege to take part of this this exchange. Congratulations again on your hard work. And perhaps just following on what Joe was saying, the last part on work opportunities and education ahead. I think if you enjoyed this exchange, I would warmly recommend you to seek other types of exchanges and perhaps study abroad and learn a language or experience a different culture. And I think that's a goodest experience as you can get in a combination, of course, with your good education. So I think perhaps this is a little taste of diplomacy life, and I hope perhaps I'll see some of you in the future.
Mr. Lin, would you like to take the floor for a short conclusive remark?
Yeah, so really great to speak with American students and also the Swedish students. By the miracle of I guess virtual videos, we can do this, and this is fantastic. But it does not take the place of in-person exchange. And I hope that soon, hopefully, God willing, that when COVID clears up, you guys will be able to meet in person. We will be able to do more in-person exchanges. I just wanted to say that I'm very impressed. I feel like you guys got a really good handle on these issues, and these are very important issues. Like Peter and I, we deal with these issues for a living. We get paid to research and understand these issues. So this is really refreshing to see you guys work on it. And I hope that it was also interesting for you doing the research and coming up with solutions. And I think that's what we need. Like, we really need problem solvers in the world. We really need the next generation to figure out where we went wrong and how to make things better. And it's great. And last plug, I realized that I might get many angry emails from parents saying, don't go to college, that you told your kids not to go to college. I hope college is great. I spent, I don't know, I have 2 graduates. I spent like 9 years in higher education. Fantastic. So do it if you can, but if it's not for you too, there's other stuff out there. So I'm just saying, there are many opportunities. The future is bright for all of you. If you come to Stockholm or Sweden, I hope to see you there one day. And really, thank you again for the opportunity.
Thank you. We hope that our discourse and its result will help to shape policy and action by our political officials, and that this chapter of dialogue across the Atlantic continues. We are looking forward to keeping in touch with you all in North Carolina.
And we are looking forward to keeping in touch with you all in Sweden. Thank you everyone for tuning in. Stay safe and enjoy the upcoming summer.
Goodbye. Hej då.
Goodbye.